co-authored the autobiography of Atlanta drag legend Charlie Brown. Wes Nimmo, a historian with New South Associates, served as one of the primary authors of the Atlanta LGBTQ+ historic context statement, and together they will reflect on the moments, movements, and personal memories that shaped the LGBTQ+ resistance movement in Atlanta and the South. We look forward to their conversation on local activism and how it laid the groundwork for the fights we're still waging today. So,
I comment, obviously, my age. I was not here when the raid happened. I was not here for most things that have occurred that I have learned about. But I learned about them through the people who were there. And luckily we have some of them in the room, and I want them to join in our conversation. And I also want to acknowledge all the people who, some of those same people, who worked to preserve documents that tell us those stories. Atlanta is lucky to have one of the largest concentrations of LGBTQ+ archival materials, probably in the country. And there's a lot to learn, and so had the privilege to be able to go and look through those things, and it's because of that foundational work that I'm able to sit here right now and talk about these things. So just wanted to give a shout out. There's too many groups to name. Look in the context, which is available online. It's all in the front of it, but those people definitely deserve recognition. So.
And to that point, I am eternally grateful, just as somebody who digs through archival material for a living, I am eternally grateful for every queer person in this city who did not throw out their we call them bar rags. Thank you for keeping them and then donating them, because and I worked for years at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and I'm a contributing editor now for Atlanta Magazine, but I'm here to tell you, those folks were not covering the queer community the way the queer community covered itself. Mm-hmm. And so that's why every single one of those publications that was saved. And so please, if you're still collecting those, please don't throw them out.
Absolutely, and if you're interested, archives have almost full runs of them, and it covers it week by week, and it is one of the most fun things to do, is to sit there and look at the pictures of those people having a great time, fighting, enjoying, doing all the things, and you would be surprised. Today, a lot of the bar magazines are very social oriented, but in the 20th century, a lot of them dedicated large space to talking about big issues. So you can learn a lot about our past from those publications.
A lot of news.
A lot of news, that's right.
So I wanted to create the framework for our conversation. How many of you saw the film last night? Yeah, so it's an experience. And
we're traumatized.
So when I was asked for the October issue of Atlanta Magazine, I was asked to do a Pride at 55 story, and I opened the story putting readers in the movie seats at the Ansley Mall Mini-Cinema on August 11th, 1969. Because so many people had no idea that happened, and that's what created, that was the catalyst for the Atlanta queer movement. And so the Atlanta Constitution and the Atlanta Journal, those of us who have been here for a minute, knew that there used to be two papers. They, of course, both enthusiastically covered this raid, as you might expect, and it was front page news. And there was great intentionality. Wes and I talked through this when we were planning our breakout session. There was great intentionality from Fulton County and Atlanta Police about going in and conducting this raid. And one quote that really stood out to me, and you'll get into this more with our not so good friend, Fulton County Criminal Court Solicitor General was a guy by the name of Hinson McAuliffe. And he told the Atlanta Journal, quote, because they photographed everyone as they were being loaded into the paddy wagons. I think there were 70-some people in the theater, and they were all photographed. And he told, this was just blatant. He said, "We thought we would look over the photographs and see what percentage of these people police could recognize as quote unquote known homosexuals." And Of course, a federal court judge later throws out the case and dismisses the charges. And ultimately, the film returned to the screen here in Atlanta in 1970 with, I think a few seconds of footage cut out. And no further incidents.
And they're playing both sides there with this. Like, it comes back. Looking back as I was prepping for it at some of the advertisements, I was reminded of other things that happened later related to McAuliffe. The theater, and I want to back up and say, when we were listening to Abby talk about our role in things and finding your space, what can you do? Being confident in yourself and finding a way to be active. These theater owners were purposely antagonizing him. They would put advertisements out. People don't like it, but we do. And later, another theater running Deep Throat, and they bought as many copies as they could, openly advertised it, and as he came and started taking them, they just put the reel back in, and the line would go right back up. So it was a back and forth with this, and they brought it back to theaters because that's the point, is to keep fighting back in that way. But yeah, maybe it's a good transition to just kind of talk about him. Henson McAuliffe, it's easy for us to sit in this room and watch that movie and think, he's coming after the queer community. This was a moment in time where he's just come. No, this man was going after everyone. And anybody that had anything to do with obscenity, how he saw it, or his morals, or smut, he was coming after them. And it's reflective of the time. Queer people weren't organized in the way that we have it now. They were relying on the people around them, the new left, the counterculture. And in a moment, we'll kind of cover what Midtown was like at that time, but it was a group effort. And so he was going after everyone, and they were pulling their resources together. And so when they're fighting against him, going after the Lonesome Cowboys, it's everyone. And the gay community is helping alongside when he goes after other spaces too. 10th Street in the 70s was a porn strip. You could go see a dirty film, buy a dirty magazine. He's going after the straight clubs just like he's going after gay spaces. And so I don't want that to be lost, that we can all work together, because a lot of times we have commonality. The people who are coming after us aren't really, sometimes they're targeting us specifically for we are. I mean, if they wanted to look for known homosexuals, there's an angle there. But he was trying to, in his mind, clean everything up. And so that's one place, as Abby was talking this morning, that kind of resonated with me. It's like the theater owner had a place, the people buying the tickets, regardless of their sexual orientation and whether they were going to see Lonesome Cowboys or Deep Throat or whatever, are working together to kind of tear apart that network that's working against everyone.
So I have a question about the raid itself. What was the cause for the raid? What was the cause for the raid?
So Henson McAuliffe had been working for the Solicitor General's office for a while through the 60s, but he became the Solicitor General in 1969. I think right before this happened. So I think this is kind of a big hurrah for him.
And he, there were great pains taken to announce this quote-unquote anti-smut campaign. So this was part of a larger effort that he was going to clean up the city from alleged smut.
Right.
So that little movie was considered smut.
Absolutely. And he sat through it. Maria wants to say something.
It's all right.
Oh. And it's weird. I remember, I think it was like 6, driving through Atlanta. We came from Charleston, and we were at Peachtree and 10th, and there were just hippies everywhere. People were selling magazines, and then you look at Piedmont Park, and it was just free love out there. It was just, it was a smutty time in Midtown.
By Henson's belief.
Was he a preacher? Remember the Hays Code? The guy was a...
I think he just had like he was very religious, and I don't know if he
Actually, was he a preacher or a priest? But he had a religious moral slant.
He was a deacon in the Baptist church.
There we go.
I thought I read that.
Yeah. And also, he was making a national reputation for himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he was quoted in Newsweek and in Time on how to make a city hot for porn or cold for porn. But he was sort of trying to to show how you could make that happen everywhere in the United States.
A stepping stone.
I want to make sure that we say something about Christopher's Kind.
Mhm.
That
Oh,
was
right.
the queer bookstore, and eventually it landed on 13th Street in a house. That was back when Midtown, the architecture was sort of human, you know, instead of massive. So that's why he has this little house. And it was very pleasant. It's like it was in a living room, right, and the, you know, the shelves and stuff. And Gene Loring, who owned it, was a bit of a provocateur. So he had books that, you know, coffee table books that were color shots of men's penises that had jewelry, you know, in them and stuff like that. Anyhow, McCullough did not like this, and Christopher's Kind was in the white pages. Remember when we had telephone directories? Well, that was it. And all these Christian groups had things listed, and they did not want to be associated with that stuff. So those two impulses made a raid inevitable. And my friend Charlie St. John was working there, and he got arrested. Gene wasn't there, okay? And he got bailed out, and he goes back to work at the store, and is raided again, and he gets arrested again, because Gene's not there. And he goes back to working there, and it's a hot story, right? So Ron Saylor, this asshole, took it upon himself to come to Christopher's Kind and do an expose, you know. And so Charlie leaves the building because the guy isn't in the building, and said, "Well, what do you want?" You know, said, "Well, you know, we need to protect our children." You know, so it's always protect the children. The children don't go to this place, you know, but we're going to protect them. And Ron Saylor, was a short black guy, and Charlie was a very tall white guy. Ron Saylor's doing this with some papers in his hand, you know, right? This is what you're like. And Charlie grabbed the papers, and that was assault. And he said, "I couldn't believe I was going to jail again, you know, over this stuff." Eventually, Christopher's Kind was allowed to exist, but Gene packed it in at some point, and everything changed. But that's how it was. In the span of 6 months, Charlie was arrested 3 times. You know, the store was threatened. You know, that's just how it was.
And just to put that in context, and maybe that's what we'll do is step back and kind of talk about the time period and what Midtown looked like during the raid era, which we kind of put between 69 and 74. I mean, a little earlier in the 60s kind of helped develop as the counterculture moved into the area. And we cut off at 74 because in the mid 1970s, the community kind of started to explode. And even though everyone wasn't out, there was a lot more things to do and there was a lot more visibility. And that happened about 75. So I do want to point out that was in early 1980s is when this happened. And it would have been right at the end of Henson McAuliffe's tenure as the general solicitor.
Reign of Terror.
Right.
Yeah. So, you know, obviously, everyone sat through that interminable movie last night for a reason. And that's because this is where the Atlanta movement is birthed. This is the community's reaction to that raid. And so, you know, the Georgia Gay Liberation Front becomes reality out of that. And we were talking at lunch that Atlanta is one of the first cities, one of the cities that celebrates the first anniversary of Stonewall.
That's right.
And Mr. Hayward, my old friend here. I want to bring you into the conversation to talk to us about the Georgia Gay Liberation Front and why that organization matters and what it did to advance things.
Thanks. I'm Dave Hayward, and I do Touching Up Our Roots, Georgia's LGBTQ story project. So I actually came here about 1972, so I wasn't part of all that at the very beginning, but I love to give props to the people that were, many of them who have passed away. So the person that really told me everything about what was happening in 69, 70, 71 was Burl Boykin, who passed in 2018. And he had been this really inveterate activist. We did a panel a couple of years ago, and we were talking about what the impact of Stonewall was locally. And we kind of said, well, there wasn't one. But that was not true for Burl, who was a big activist, and other people like Bill Smith, Steve Abbott. So they were very well aware of what was going on. And when Stonewall happened, that was a big impact upon them. And then, of course, then there was the raid here. And the Smithsonian calls it Atlanta's own Stonewall, which it really is not that much of a comparison. It's like bricks weren't thrown and bars were not burned down and
Riots were not in the streets.
Exactly.
Right.
There was not a rebellion for weeks and weeks and weeks. But I'm just really inspired by what they did. And it was really hard. It's kind of like one of the things that we talk about is how people basically had to invent themselves because there was like no template. Or if there was, it was negative. It was like, police drive the perverts out of Piedmont Park. So it's like, okay, we're not gonna relate to that. But what Burl told me was that, and he came to I think he said that a lot of people banded around the Ansley Mall Mini-Cinema that night when that happened. And then of course it was the catalyst for them to form the Georgia Gay Liberation Front. And one of the things that I was told too is the guy Bill Smith, he's featured in the Night at the Sweet Gumhead that Martin Paget wrote. And he insisted that they call it the Georgia Gay Liberation Front and not the Atlanta because he wanted to cover the entire state. And then it was kind of prophetic because then they had a student group at the University of Georgia, the Committee on Gay Education, and the regents did everything they could to drive the group off campus, but did not succeed. And so I remember, this is like 72 and on, going to Athens a lot. And there were protests and demonstrations and all that kind of thing, trying to keep the Committee on Gay Education on campus. So what is interesting to me now with all the shit we're going through is that those battles are not being fought. They're not trying to, actually, maybe I need to correct myself, I think some of the student groups are being driven off campus at Kennesaw and also at Georgia Tech. So, it's like, okay, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But what we did, for example, and it's kind of like tactics, mass demonstrations. And then I really want to call out my dear friend Diamond Lill, who has passed away. But she was a major drag queen. And I had to be careful because I like to use her voice as, well, I don't really have any politics. I don't know about politics. But we knew what we needed to do was get a lot of attention. And so we had big events, and she headlined fundraisers. And I believe they were in Athens. I think they were at the University of Georgia. And then, she just performed. And, people, they maybe didn't care that much about the issues, but they wanted to see Diamond Lill. So they did. And I did an interview with her, and it's a StoryCorps, and thankfully all the StoryCorps, National Public Radio, at the Library of Congress. So hopefully that will stay.
Another good source.
Yes.
You can find information.
Library of Congress, StoryCorps. And she talked about how they had to run the police gauntlet, and it's kind of like, well, you know, Diamond, that was not for you. That was, the issue was not, you were performing, but because you know, she was the man in drag, right? So, but I think from what I'm told, and then of course I kind of came here and got involved from '72 on, is that was so many times it's we solidify and fortify ourselves in opposition. And that's basically what happened. And then we like to talk about, I did an interview with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution when it was the 50th anniversary of Pride, which would have been 2020, right? Yeah, 1970, 2020. And they were trying to find the footage from the very first Pride, which was 1971. And I was not here then, but it was amazing to me to see the video, and all the things that Burl told me were true. Because you never know when you talk to somebody, did they get it right? Is it accurate and everything? And he said, you know, the city, too busy to hate, would not give us a permit for the march. The very first march they had in 1971. And I asked him, I said, why didn't you have a march in 1970? And he said, because we were afraid no one would show up. And then we would humiliate ourselves and embarrass ourselves by having like a kind of non-march. So by '71, they thought that they had enough people together. And I know when we interviewed Burl, again, it's funny when you talk to activists because you want to be really careful. Because I said, well, he was a Grand Marshal of the 1971 Pride. And he said, no, I was the Grand Marshal. It was not a, it was the Grand Marshal.